right. Well, thanks for showing up to another series of our Kansas City Community Garden Giving Grove Orchard Workshop. This particular one, we've been doing some workshops here lately on summer pruning, but this particular one is creating a healthy and biodiverse orchard ecosystem. So this is all about how you can not only add other fruit plants, but also some other plantings that you can provide to help add more fauna into your orchard. So things like
Thank you.
birds, bees, wasps. Oh, somebody has their mic on. If you wouldn't mind turning your mic off. Okay. And so yeah, this is all about adding different things to your orchard so you can create that biodiverse habitat. Have some of the insects working for you, have some of the birds working for you, and have your soil work for you as well. I'm also going to turn off my camera because we're all getting tired of the max headroom vision here. All right. And if you have any questions, just in the while the presentation is happening, feel free to go ahead and just shout them out. If you want, you could type a question into the text bar, into the chat, and Melinda may be able to get an answer out to you. I'll also save a little bit of time for questions at the end of the presentation. All right, so what does biodiversity in an orchard mean? So really, when you think about most commercial crops, most commercial growing operations, it's very much a monoculture. And so with biodiversity, this means growing more species. But really, what also does that mean, and what are we trying to do here? So, the challenge that we've all undertaken is to grow fruits. This is a challenge for sure, because everything likes a fruit. It's not just us. But these fruits also have other insects that eat them. There are other mammals that eat them. So all living things have predators. And by simply planting a fruit tree, you're actually inviting some of those specific predators into your orchard. So when you think about an apple tree, well, all of a sudden you're bringing some very host specific insects in. You're bringing in things like codling moth and apple maggot. So that's a real thing. The other thing about this is our soils and our environment. They've been disturbed. They've been manipulated. Our soil that we dig in most spaces is not the soil that was here pre-colonization. This is soil that has been trucked around the city. There's soil that's come in from the river bottoms. There's gravel that's been laid down, six decades ago. It's all mixed up in there. It's compacted. It's kind of a mess. It is the Hopi term koyaanisqatsi, which is basically life out of balance, and that is sort of the state of where we grow right now. This may sound bleak, but it is the reality, and we are doing the best with it in this reality. So what steps can we take to create this healthier environment for us, our neighbors, and our fruit trees? So those are the challenges. And our ultimate goal is to maximize the good fruits, the good outcomes with all of these trees and fruit crops, and do so while having sort of a low environmental impact and less inputs into the soil via fertilizers, via insecticides and pesticides. So let's look at kind of some of the different categories of biodiversity in an orchard. First off, let's look at insects, for example. I mean, we all know about honeybees. You know, we we have this nice relationship with honeybees because we raise them as a livestock and they provide us honey. Well, the other thing that they also do is sure, they provide some good pollination services. But there are also other things like mason bees, hoverflies, which happen to be a wonderful predator insect. Syrphid flies, they're another great predator. And then things like ladybugs, lacewings, wasps, etc. All of these serve a little ecological niche. Some of them are pollinators, some are predators of what we would consider bad bugs. You know, when we're looking at bad bugs, we're thinking about codling moths, we're thinking about Japanese beetles, we're thinking about bagworms, we're thinking about stink bugs. These are all the insects that end up going for the crop that we're raising. You know, when we think about plants, we think about good plants. We think about fruit trees. Now I have an asterisk there because fruit trees can certainly become problematic, and even you know, some trees, they produce fruits that they are not edible, but they get eaten by birds, and those birds will then spread them. Think of shrub honeysuckle, think of calorie pears. Um, but some other good plants, you think of the legume family. Legumes, they fix nitrogen. And what that means is they take atmospheric nitrogen and they take that in through the foliage. That goes into the roots. That atmospheric nitrogen feeds the roots of that plant, but also as those roots of that plant die, that feeds the soil. So things like legumes, they're bringing in what's already there in the air, they're bringing it down, adding it to the soil, storing it in the soil. Think about the mint family. Mint family is great for so many things because there are so many herbs in the mint family, but also provides a lot of flowers that are very nectar rich. Onions, garlic, and other nectar rich plants. And then there are a lot of bad plants out there. You know, Johnson grass, bindweed, Bermuda grass, etc. And then, you know, we think about fungus. A lot of people consider fungus is bad. They'll see mushrooms in their orchard, and they'll take a stick to them and try to dig them out of the orchard. And it's like, well, no, actually, that's the mushroom is a decomposer. It is something that is acting on something that's already dead within the soil, and it's helping build soil. But then there are things like bad funguses out there, things like brown rot, things like cedar apple rust. And then we have our fauna, and you know, that's things like bats, birds, skinks, all of these, especially bats and birds. Oh my goodness, they can eat so many bad insects out there. You think of bats, they fly in the evening. When do moths fly? They fly in the evening. What moths are pests of fruit trees? You've got codling moth and you have oriental fruit moth. Those are the two main pests that we battle. And then there's some other fauna that, you know, we may consider pests, things like squirrel and deer, possums, but they also have, a role in the ecosystem. And in most cases, they were here before we were. So we are also sort of, we do have to share a little bit of the harvest with these, but we want to minimize the amount of harvest we share with these creatures. So some other tenets of biodiversity in an orchard are avoid planting monocultures. So as soon as you have more than 50% of your species as one species, that becomes a problem. Let's say you are growing 50 apples and 20 pear trees. You have something that comes through and starts affecting apples, like codling moth. Well, that may end up ruining your full crop of apples. Now, you may have a few pear trees on the side that you're able to get a good crop from. So, by diversifying your orchard planting, you're going to ensure that if one crop fails, you end up getting another crop for that year. Now, the thing about orcharding is, yeah, these are perennial crops. They come back year in and year out. You have the long game that you're playing with these crops. These are 20, 30, 40-year cropping systems. So every year is going to be a little bit different. This year, if you've paid attention to the weather, no peaches around here. We had a January deep hard freeze of 13 below zero. That means all peach flower buds, all of those buds that were formed, that were on the twigs, those flower buds were killed. So folks that had all of their money riding on peaches, that was just that was a total loss for them. So now if they had apples or if they had Asian pears, well, they're going to have a great crop this year. So having the diversity in the orchard can help buffer during the lean times or during those challenging times. Another thing to take into account when you're diversifying your orchard is to plant resistant varieties, and that is one of the tenets that we started out with in the Giving Grove Orchard Program, was to plant resistant varieties to a number of different diseases and funguses. Insect pests, no, that can be much harder because insect pests, there can be really no resistance to an insect pest. So, but there are some varieties of fruits that are easier to grow and more resistant than others. Things like jujubes. And I know some of your sites may have jujubes. Jujubes really don't have any insect pests, no specific insect pests. There are some general leaf feeding pests. Sometimes you'll get a cucumber beetle that takes advantage of a split jujube fruit, but there are no specific insect pests that bother jujubes. Pawpaws, they have some pests, but they hardly really have any pests when you compare them to something like apples or peaches. Aronia berry, that's almost a foolproof plant right there. However, with aronia, it's not a fresh eating berry. It is a berry you must process. It is a berry that you add to things like juices and fruit leathers. But it's a berry that is incredibly easy to grow and incredibly healthful. The same with elderberry. This is very easy to grow. It's a weed. It shows up in the ditches. Yet it has a lot of anthocyanins and a lot of nutrients within those berries. And then there are pears and Asian pears and cherries. These are very easy to grow, produce a reliable crop almost every year, and don't really have much insect and they do have a little bit of fungal and disease pressure, but very little insect pressure. Now then we get down to apples and we get down to peaches. Apples will continually have pest pressure. It is hard to get blemish-free apples year in and year out, especially if you are doing an organic pest management. If you're doing a conventional pest management and you're spraying once a week with a lot of these harsh chemicals, yes, you can get perfect apples. But that's part of the deal is we really don't recommend a lot of these commercial insecticides, these commercial fungicides, because they are bad for the environment. And they're also bad for the people that are spraying. And ultimately, it can be bad for the folks that are consuming the fruit, depending on what's being sprayed. And then there are peaches. And peaches are perhaps the most difficult. We all love peaches. I don't think I've met somebody that doesn't like peaches. Maybe they don't like them because of the fuzz. Um, but every living thing wants a peach. And I'm talking insects, I'm talking squirrels, I'm talking raccoons, everything wants a peach. And so peaches are really our most difficult crop to grow year in and year out. Another thing about this is most of the fruit plants that we grow around here, they're all in one plant family, and that is the rose family. So you think about roses. Roses aren't easy to grow. You can get some roses that'll kind of grow like weeds here and there, but for the most part, roses have a lot of pests too. And most everything in the rose family has a lot of pests. So it's that's just a thing. That's it's unfortunate that all of the tasty fruits we grow are within that family. Um, but they are susceptible to a lot of problems. So we'll get into this a little bit more here as we're talking about some of these low pest and low input fruits. And if you haven't started growing these, I think it might not be a bad thing. Now figs, I have figs on this slide. Yeah, figs are low pest pressure. However, getting figs year in and year out in this climate in the Midwest is certainly a challenge. Figs are more of this novelty crop where you'll end up getting maybe 20 to 40, 50 figs a year, and you don't start getting these figs until really the first week of September. Maybe you get some figs in mid-August. Uh, and then oftentimes we get our first frost. That first frost will cause all the foliage to drop, the figs stop ripening, and then you have stems of these figs that have figs on them and multiple, and they're never going to ripen. So that becomes a challenge, but when you do get figs on them, my goodness, the kids really like them a lot. Everybody who has a fresh fig really likes them a lot. I already mentioned jujubes. That's this top photo here. Jujubes have great production. They're really high in vitamin C. And really, I mean, you can almost set them and forget them. They dehydrate really well. We like to plant them at a lot of schools because there are so many fruits on them that each kid in a school will get to try one, if not two or three. So we like them a lot. We really like bush cherries, and for those of you that are growing bush cherries, you know that they are a very productive shrub. These are a shrub, so they're multi-trunked. They only get to be 6 to 7 feet tall, sometimes 8 feet tall. And each one will produce 25 to 35 pounds of shrub. These are tart cherries. They are They are a red flesh and a red juice. The juice is incredibly pretty. The juice is also nutrient packed. The cherries dehydrate really well, making that wonderful little dried cherry snack. Very easy care once you get them established. So we love them. Pawpaws, I mentioned them earlier. They are our largest native fruit. We have a lot of native stands of pawpaws around some of our small rivers and creeks and north-facing slopes. Uh, you're never going to see a pawpaw in the store because they don't have a shelf life. So most of the time, if you're going to see a pawpaw, it's when you're out there doing a little foraging. But there are many cultivars out there now. There are a lot of folks that are really interested in this crop, and they do take a while to start producing once you've planted them. But once you do plant them and you start getting them, they're such an unusual fruit, and they're kind of a delight for all ages. The other thing about the pawpaw is it brings in one of our native species of butterflies, the zebra swallowtail butterfly. It lays its eggs on the foliage, and the caterpillars feed on the foliage. This is one of these things where, you know, a caterpillar may be considered a pest in some situations. This is not. The plant serves as a host plant. The caterpillar will do a little bit of eating on the foliage. It's never going to defoliate the pawpaw. If you get to that point, then maybe you do need to start taking the caterpillars to a pawpaw patch somewhere else. Yeah, it's another reason to plant this tree. Then there are persimmons. Persimmons are really pretty fruit pest free. You do have some foliar pests that feed on them, but persimmons are really fairly easy to grow once you get them established. Like I say, there are no specific fruit pests that go for them. Persimmons naturally are really astringent in the ripening process. Once they finally ripen, they have lost their astringency. And yeah, just very easy, wonderful crop. And there's clove currant as well, and that's the bottom photo here. Clove currant is one of our native currant species. The variety Crandall gets absolutely loaded. Wonderful fruit, very easy to care for. You set it and you forget it. Just don't forget to harvest them. And then there are some other things that require a little bit of processing, things like elderberry and aronia berry. I mentioned those in the previous slide. So we've talked about some fruit crops. Now let's talk about some other things that we can plant out in the orchard to help increase biodiversity. And let's talk about insectary gardens and diversity strips. So the term diversity strip applies more to larger acreages where, let's say, you have 10 acres of strawberries, uh, if not more, and you're taking a row or two out of production to plant just plants that have lots of flowers on. And the reason you're adding these plants that have a lot of floral area is because most of those flowers have what are called nectaries, and it's these nectaries that bring in the wasps, they bring in the bees, they bring in the bee flies, they bring in the pollinating flies, they bring in the parasitizing flies, they bring in the parasitizing wasps, they bring in all of this insect activity. And a lot of this insect activity also serves as a beneficial or a predator insect in that strawberry field, in that orchard, et cetera, et cetera. So the insects that you are bringing in are serving as pest management for the main crop that you're trying to grow. Now, here in smaller situations where we don't have the acreage, we tend to refer to these more as insectary gardens. And that means that we're bringing in insects. We don't call them pollinator gardens, although pollinator garden is sort of a subset of an insectary garden. Uh, I mean, yes, these do bring in pollinators for sure, because anytime you have a flower, an insect is going to go for the sugar. Um, so basically, this is just like a sugar bar. This is something that these insects are going to. Yet as these insects are hanging out at the sugar bar, they're looking and they're seeing, oh, there's some protein over here. And that protein happens to be, oh, hey, that's an insect pest, or that's the larva of an insect pest. And really, they're after the larva. They're after the big, fat, juicy caterpillars. And it's those big, fat, juicy caterpillars that a braconid, wasp, or a syrphid fly is going to parasitize. So they'll lay their eggs within that caterpillar. Those eggs will hatch within that caterpillar. Those little larvae are hanging out, eating inside that caterpillar. And then as that caterpillar starts to die off, the larva they'll start to pupate on the outside of the body of that caterpillar, and then the species continues. So it's kind of a very visceral, very gross, if you will, process, but it is the process of how these beneficial insects end up killing some of these pest insects out. So a little bit about planting for these pollinator and predator insects that are out there, predator slash beneficial insects. Um, one of the things that I think is very important to say about this too is that a lot of these insectary gardens, they are composed of locally native wildflowers, grasses, and woody plants. So what that means is these plants are native to the area. They have been native to this area prior to colonization, and oftentimes they've been native to this area since the last ice age. So we kind of look at, 10, 12,000 years ago when we had some of those last vestiges of the ice age. So this is the flora that we have been left with, which is very beautiful. So yeah, these locally and regionally native plants, they help foster that native insect population. And there are a lot of symbiotic relationships with these plants. There happen to be certain species of bumblebees that they go for only a certain species of blue sage that is native to our area. So there is a symbiotic relationship with that. You kind of think of the monarch butterfly and milkweed, very similar. The monarch butterfly needs the Asclepias genus, the milkweed plants, to lay their eggs on, so the larvae eat that and then will transform into the monarch butterfly. Very much the same thing is going on with a lot of these species of plants. So these nectar sources, they're bringing in all of these different beneficials, and they're bringing in some of the pest insects. Guess what? Even a cucumber beetle, it's got to sip some nectar here and there. Even a codling moth larva is going to be getting some, or excuse me, a codling moth adult is going to be getting some nectar here and there. So these bring in the good bugs, but they also bring in some of the bad bugs. Remember, the plants that you've planted already, the fruit plants that you've put in, they're already bringing in bad bugs. The apple's already going to bring in the codling moth. So just realize that this insectary garden is helping to level the playing field a little bit more. So the other thing about this is choose plants with long bloom times. Turns out a lot of our native perennials have a really long bloom time. Some are shorter than others, but a lot of these also have a lot of nectaries in them. Also, a lot of these plants will bring in birds and bats. So you think about um, you think about seed heads. You think about the seed heads of black-eyed Susans, of rattlesnake master, of buttonbush, of echinacea, of the purple coneflower. What do you see when those flowers, the petals drop off, the seed heads start drying? You start seeing birds show up into the garden. Well, birds are a predator too. They eat caterpillars here and there. As a matter of fact, that's what most birds raise their young on, is on caterpillars. So you think about in the spring when when the baby birds are actually sort of late spring, early June when the baby birds are out. Well, they've got to eat something, and mom and dad are bringing back caterpillars for them. And so that's another thing. And then there are the bats. And I already mentioned the bats. So having something that flowers at night so the bats can nectar, but then also realizing that bats need a little bit of a habitat. And so having some bat houses will then ensure that you have a bat population flying at night that is also working on that moth population flying at night. All right, some other considerations with the planting for pollinators and predator insects. Flowering time, and really you want to have your flowering time from pretty much as soon as plants start breaking bud to when plants shut down. So having things from typically mid to late March all the way to Halloween to mid-November. So you want to make sure that you have a habitat for that long for all of those different species of mason bees, wasps, flies, etc. You also want to consider your proximity to your orchard. Now, this is really important. So think about your orchard. Think about pest management that you do on your orchard, because an insectary garden is not going to solve all of your pest management. You're still going to have to do some sort of spraying here and there. Now, if you have a bunch of flowers right near your trees, well, what's on those flowers? What's going to those flowers? You have different pollinators. You may have a lot of honeybees in the area. You may have a lot of mason bees in the area. What happens when you spray an insecticide on a tree? Well, that insecticide will also go down right below that tree. Now, sometimes that insecticide will get carried by the wind a few feet, 10, 15 feet from that tree. And that insecticide is going to get carried in the direct, so the wind's going to blow that insecticide. And most of the time when we're spraying insecticides in an orchard, we're spraying during the growing season. And that normally means we're having winds come out of the south, southwest. So planting your insectary garden right under the trees or to the north and northeast is a big mistake, because those insectary gardens are going to be getting spray drift from what you're spraying. So locating your insectary, your pollinator garden to the south and southwest will ensure that you're not going to get spray drift into your insectary garden, because the predominant wind is coming from the south or southwest. So when you're thinking about planting these things, locate them south and southwest of your orchard. Some other things, if you do end up planting beneath trees or already have some things that are planted beneath the trees, you either want to make sure you're spraying first thing in the morning when there's no insect activity. You've cut off the flowers before you spray, or you put a tarp over anything that might be flowering and then you spray. Another thing to think about in these gardens is to maintain a little bit of bare soil within your insectary garden patch. What does bare soil do? Bare soil serves as nesting spots for some of these ground nesting species. And there are a number of ground nesting bees and wasps that need access to that bare soil. So don't just have it sown in grass or don't just mulch over things. Make sure there is a little bit of access to bare soil. And then also maintain some dead stems for species to nest in. And this is things like orchard mason bees, some of the other stem nesting bees. They need stems that are about a 1/4 inch to 3/8 inch thick. And these stems need to be standing for at least a year so they can continue their generations year in and year out. So here's just a few plants right here. I've listed them out, and this is based on some of their flowering times. A lot of these plants, and I mentioned this earlier, they're in the mint family, but we do have some other things. There are certain plant families tend to draw in more insects than others. Golden Alexander's is in the parsley family. So you think about dill, you think about fennel. Both of those are also in the parsley family. There are a lot of things in the parsley family that the wasps are just super attracted to. Things in the mint family, like the bee balms, the mountain mints, they bring in a lot of insects. There happens to be elderberry. Elderberry is a great one because guess what? You saw that on the list earlier. Not only do you get a lot of good fruits off of it, but prior to the fruits, you have these large flower heads, and you're getting a lot of insect activity, lots of little wasps on those things, bumblebees, honeybees. The mountain mints, and that's what the top photo is of. And if you have not come here to the community gardens to see the mountain mint when it is in full display, you can count 40 different species of insect on those plants. It is very biodynamic. Then we have some things like hydrangeas, the wild hydrangea, which happens to be our native hydrangea. In one of the previous slides, I don't think I talked over it, didn't talk about it. But making sure to choose plants that have long bloom times and large nectaries and avoiding sterile cultivars. So what's it mean to avoid sterile cultivars? Well, wild hydrangea, Hydrangea arborescens is like I say, it's a native hydrangea. However, there is the cultivar Annabelle. Annabelle's been used in the landscape industry for goodness, since somebody found it growing out in the field back 100 years ago. These are what are called the mop head hydrangeas. They have these big white mop heads. However, they have sterile flowers. So there is no reason for an insect to go to those sterile flowers. However, the true species of Hydrangea arborescens has fertile flowers. So you still get a very beautiful blossom, but it's also serving a purpose. It is serving a purpose for that insect community that needs the nectar. There are a lot of perennial sunflowers out there. Perennial sunflowers sometimes don't fit into a garden very well because they can be a little rambunctious. They'll grow into colonies, but very beautiful. You get a lot of insect activity out of them. And then there are a lot of the aster species, and the aster species is great because you get a lot of late season nectar source in those. And actually, this should say September to November. We've even had asters flower into mid-December if we've had a warm enough November and December. So here I just wanted to kind of point this out via families. Now, some of these plants that I'm talking about here, they're not all native plants. Some like dill and fennel and Queen Anne's lace, none of those are native, but they do bring in a lot of insect activity. Of course, dill and fennel, you're familiar with being herbs, so a great thing to grow in the herb garden. Queen Anne's lace, it's also known as wild carrot. Pretty much a roadside weed. I wouldn't plan on cultivating that anywhere in a garden, but it is a uh, powerful plant for bringing in a lot of insect predators. And then, like I say, there's the aster family, which includes sunflower, asters, liatris, black-eyed Susan, purple coneflowers. Oh my goodness, the aster family is just huge. And a lot of these that you see here, there are many, 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 many native species of those. We have something like 7 different native liatris species. I think we have 17 native sunflower species. Same with the aster species. Black-eyed Susans, we have 3 or 4 different native species. Same with the coneflowers. So there's really a lot to choose from there. And then there's the mint family. And that's things like mountain mint and bee balm, anise hyssop. But then we get into some of the culinary things in the mint family, and obviously the culinary mints, thyme, um, sage. A lot of those are great for bringing in bumblebees, specifically bumblebees and honeybees. All right, here is a big list and a table. Uh, this pretty much mimics what we have in our insectary garden here at Kansas City Community Gardens. And these are all the plants that we like, and there are many more that we like. And it gives you sort of the rough flowering times and the flower color that they have too. So if you look at this, we have a lot of yellows with the round leaf groundsel and the golden Alexanders in spring. We get into the pinks with the Monardas. We have penstemons, and then we kind of go on down. And lastly, we have the asters that are sort of wrapping up the season from September all the way to November. But this is, like I say, representative of what we have in our insectary garden to make sure that we have flowering all the way from March into November. All right, so now that we're kind of getting past the insect stage of things, so let's look at some other plants that we can add that are beneficial to the orchard. And this isn't really benefiting an insect population so much, but it's helping benefit the orchard microbiome, and you can start making sprays out of some of these plants for your orchard. So if you've done a deep dive into Michael Phillips' Holistic Orchard book, he talks about a lot of these plants and how they can be used in your orchard by not only creating some of these fermented sprays, but also with planting them around or placing them around some of your trees. So to talk about horsetail here, horsetail, that's the top photo right there. Horsetail is something that you can find natively around in some of our you'll find them in little springs, you'll find them along riverbanks. It is a colony forming plant. It's actually a prehistoric plant. Um, but this is something where you can grow in your garden, in your orchard. I do recommend if you grow in your garden or orchard, you have it, make sure that it's contained because it will spread everywhere. But you can grow it, and then you could make a fermented spray out of this. Now, making fermented sprays, that's a labor of love. That's going to take time. It's going to take You chopping these pieces of plant up in a bucket, adding water to that bucket, and making sure that the mixture ferments, and then you strain it, and then you spray it. And this is not without odor. These things have a nose to them, so you also have to kind of be bold, and when you are doing something like this. But these fermented sprays of horsetail can actually strengthen the cuticle of the plant, and that cuticle, it's that coating. Now, a lot of, especially when you're talking about new growth on a plant, it's not hardened off. It's very succulent. But things like horsetail can help strengthen that foliage so that tissue is less likely to get penetrated by a fungus. Same with the skin on a fruit. So horsetail works that way. Stinging nettle can be used as a calcium spray. And if you're familiar with stinging nettle is it has so many uses. It's such a wonderful green to use in the spring. Yeah, it is stinging nettle, but you can throw it into a pot of water, and just let it steep or let it cook in that pot of water for just a couple of minutes. It'll lose its stingers, and you can eat this. Make a wonderful nettle pesto out of it. But you could also use it as a calcium spray for your apples and pears. And calcium is also one of those things that some varieties of fruits, they have a hard time uptaking, as the fruit starts growing larger and larger. There's garlic, or anything really within the allium genus. Uh, Alliums can be used as fungicides as well as scent disruptors. So planting alliums around apples or peach trees and cutting them periodically, leaving the cuttings right there along the trunk of the tree, that's a scent disrupting activity that will keep boars away from your trees. Comfrey, a lot of people use comfrey. Comfrey is what's called a dynamic accumulator in the orchard. Comfrey sends out really deep roots, and those deep roots are mining the soil for nutrients. And as it's mining for those nutrients, the foliage grows and grows and grows, and that foliage is packed with those nutrients that are down 18 inches into the soil. Well, you cut that comfrey plant, those leaves, they start to deteriorate. They start to break down. As they break down, all of those nutrients are now getting into that top 2, 3, 4 inches of soil. So what was once it may not have been available to your tree is becoming more bioavailable to your tree. Then there are some other plants like Sweet Annie. That's the bottom picture. Sweet Annie is an Artemisia species, so it's has that very sage-brushy like smell, wonderful scent. But it is also used as a scent disruptor for the female codling moth. And so you can cut this and then place it around your trees. I wouldn't really recommend growing it right next to your trees because it is a rather robust plant. But you can cut it from another portion of your garden or yard and then add it beneath your trees. So add it as a scent disruptor to keep the female codling moth from laying eggs in your fruit tree. All right, then there's planting for nutrient management. So this is adding biodiversity for soil health. And I mentioned this earlier that a lot of the legumes, the bean and pea family, are really good at improving soil health by fixing that nitrogen in the air, and by then those roots accumulating that nitrogen and those roots dying, that adds to the nitrogen in the soil that then becomes bioavailable to the plants that are near those roots. So, sometimes this looks like annuals, and sometimes it looks like perennials. But let's talk about some of these. So here's some nitrogen fixing plants, and these are some of these are annual, some of these are perennial, and some of them you would be adding within the rows or between the rows of the trees. So the top photo is of indigo bush. Indigo bush is one of our native shrubs. It gets these uh, beautiful purple flowers with these nice orange stamens. The smell is sort of this intoxicating, like a almost like a deep red wine, like a Merlot or something scent that flowers in this late May all the way through mid to late June. The bumblebees absolutely love it. But the other thing that this shrub does is it will send out quite a root system. And being in the bean family, those roots will collect that nitrogen. The roots also do a really good job of breaking up the soil. So if you have a hard pan soil texture, this plant does a really good job of breaking up the soil. But with perennials, with most perennials, you get about, I don't know, a sixth to a third of those roots on the perennials. They will die year in and year out. So that's true of the indigo bush. That's true of the blue wild indigo. It's true of most perennial crops. They will lose a certain amount of their roots every year. And as those roots die off, those roots are what's helping create more nitrogen for the surrounding plants. The indigo bush, it can also be used as kind of a chop and drop, meaning that after it flowers, you would cut it down by a third to a half, drop that foliage on the ground. As it's breaking down, it's adding nutrients, it's adding carbon to the soil. And then you're helping keep this plant a little bit shorter too, because it can ultimately get 10 feet tall. And by cutting it right after flower, you are promoting more branching for next year for more flowers the following year. There's blue wild indigo, another member of the bean family, and that's the photo below it. Beautiful, beautiful flowers. It's one that we sell here as one of our pollinator plantings. 3 to 4 feet tall, it flowers in May, and the plant would be allowed to stand. This plant will send out roots 12 to 15 feet deep. So this thing, it's a workhorse. So it really helps break up soil. It also happens to be the host species for some of these sulfur butterflies. Same with the indigo bush. But yeah, just add some beauty. It adds some nitrogen. It helps break up soil. We all know about the clovers. There's white clover, red clover, some of the hybrid clovers. These can certainly be added to your orchard. I think the challenge when adding clovers to an orchard is figuring out the spray time and figuring out, okay, well, the clover's no longer flowering. I can go ahead and safely spray. The problem is most clover ends up flowering kind of when a lot of the sprays need to be applied, and that is from bud break of trees all the way to petal fall of trees. And so figuring out a timing on your sprays when you add clover can be super difficult. And sometimes what this may mean is if you have a lot of clover in your orchard or you have planted clover in your orchard, that you should do your spraying at dusk. You should do your spraying after all of those pollinators have gone to bed. Or you should do your spraying when it's cool out, when the pollinators are naturally not going to be up because it's below 55 degrees. So just beware if you have a lot of clover in your planting area. Now, the last one I want to mention is partridge pea. I don't have a good photo of partridge pea, but it is an annual that it's got these beautiful yellow flowers on it. It kind of looks like sensitive plant foliage. It looks like well, it looks like sensitive plant if you know sensitive plant foliage wise. But the little yellow flowers bring in the bumblebees. They love it. The plant itself will send down this taproot that goes about 1 foot to 2 feet deep, and it's just covered with those nitrogen fixing nodules. So you sow this around your trees, especially if you're having issues with nitrogen uptake or nitrogen in the soil. You sow the seeds around your trees. The plants germinate, they flower, the bees are loving it. And then when the end of the season comes along, the plants die, the roots die, the nitrogen's being absorbed, all of the biomass that's on top with the plants, it's breaking down. So partridge pea, I think, is a great suitable plant. More people just need to get it in their orchard. So I alluded to this before on the nitrogen fixing plants and how to spray and what to spray in this situation. So yes, certainly this can be a challenge, and especially with clovers, it becomes less of a challenge when you have something uh, like the indigo bush or the blue wild indigo, but it can still be somewhat of a challenge. So knowing when the plant flowers, yeah, that's an obvious. Knowing if that plant serves as a caterpillar food source, especially a native caterpillar food source. Both indigo bush and wild blue indigo, yes, they do. They serve as food sources for, like I say, the giant sulfur, the dusky wing sulfur, some of the other sulfur butterflies that are out there. However, these are also large enough that it's easy enough to avoid hitting them with sprays. It's not like a planting of clover that's right beneath your trees that is probably going to get sprayed on. The other thing is knowing what you are spraying and knowing that many of the insecticides that we use are non-selective, meaning that they can kill a lot of different species of insect. Even neem is a non-selective insecticide. So just beware of that. Reading the label on these things is also important. And then, I mentioned the spraying at dusk or spraying in the evening, spraying on non-windy days, and avoiding the non-target plants. All right, don't know if I need to mention this too much because we all, I think, battle these in our own spaces. Um, but just know that eliminating these will actually go a long way to having a more productive biodiversity in your orchard. So if you don't know Bermuda grass, if you don't know Johnson grass, if you don't know bindweed, there they are right there. Another thing, I just want to throw in a plug that weeds are pretty much plants out of place, and and mulberries don't belong in blackberry beds. And also mulberries in general, I think a lot of people, they want to hold on to the mulberry that's growing somewhere because they think, well, I can collect those mulberries in 10 years. Also realize that that mulberry tree may become the parent of a million other mulberry trees 30 years down the road. So mulberries grow in every fence line in the metro. They grow in a lot of our blackberry beds in the metro because people have left them. They haven't figured out that, oh, that's a mulberry, that's not a blackberry. So just a word to the wise. All right, so now let's get into the avian biodiversity here, a little bit about birds and bats. Because yeah, anything we can do to bring in some of nature's pest control, let's do that. I don't have a good picture of this, but I think we've all seen purple martin houses before. So you can make purple martin houses out of bottle gourds. Uh, Purple martins, there's been a long history of folks using purple martins as pest control. Purple martins, they will nest in these structures. They can be big houses. Well, they need to be big houses because they nest communally. And then they're flying throughout the day, and oh my goodness, they're picking off so many insects out in the garden and orchard. So especially if you have a big area, and Benita, I'm looking at you. You guys would be perfect for a purple martin house over there. Because those purple martins would help you guys out with so much pest control.
I'm writing it
So
down.
so some other things. If you have access to chickens, not every orchard site is going to have access to chickens, but getting the chickens engaged in your fruit trees at the right time uh, is can be very important in pest management. So what this looks like is these chickens. Chickens do what they do. They scratch, and they're looking for food. They're looking for something to eat. Well, you introduce the chickens under your fruit trees, kind of the mid January on to, let's say, late February. And you may need to seed things a little bit. You may need to throw a little chicken scratch under your trees, but that will get the chickens working beneath your trees. And what the chickens start doing is they start scratching that first half inch, that inch and a half of soil. Well, what are they uncovering? They're uncovering larvae. They're uncovering larvae of codling moth. They're uncovering larvae of oriental fruit moth. They're uncovering some pests. And so once a chicken finds one of those, they're like, oh, I'm going to go back there. I'm going to try this again. So chickens are very effective at pest control in the right season. Don't have chickens in your orchard through the growing season. That's just going to lead to a bunch of problems. But have those chickens there, like I say, mid to late January, all the way through February. They'll eat a lot of those pests. So some other things are building bat boxes. We are currently working with the Scout, trying to figure out uh, uh, getting this Scout some projects with some of our orchards for bat boxes. We've done this years in the past, where the Eagle Scout will build the bat box and install them at some of our orchards. Now, we don't have the data on this, sort of the before and after, but we know that bats are now in those orchards. And we do know that those bats are eating flying moths, and most of these are flying fruit moths. So having the habitat is very important. In some cases, you may already have some habitat, large dead trees on the edge of the orchard. That certainly is that habitat that they need. Consider also adding a source of water. Any source of water will help bring birds into your environment. And so if you're able to get a little fountain going somewhere, a little bubbler, you will get more avian activity, and the more avian activity you have, they will also start looking for other pieces of protein, other caterpillars out there. Now let's talk a little bit about fungal diversity. So why is fungal diversity important to soil and plant health? Well, fungus helps break down organic material in the soil. So without some of those good funguses in the soil, that organic material may just sit there. It may just sit there and it's not able to break down. And it needs to break down in order to become bioavailable to the plants that you're growing. So having fungus in the soil is very helpful. So some steps that you can take to do this. If your soil has not been aerated in a long time, maybe it's never been aerated. What this looks like is a core aerator. Pulls out the little tubes of soil that are about 4 or 5 inches long. Have your site core aerated, because core aeration will then get oxygen into your soil. Now, then you add some organic material right after you core aerate, so adding some compost. That compost is now able to sink down into that soil profile a little bit deeper, and that compost will help with tree growth, help with soil biology. Another thing is make sure you're adding a lot of wood chips to your site. Wood chips year in and year out as they break down, they not only create a fluffier soil, a less compacted soil, but also it adds a lot of carbon and organic material to your soil. And it's that carbon and organic material that gets added to the soil that helps promote plant growth. Now, building a compost and using the compost, yeah, that's easier said than done. We all have compost piles. Does it compost all the way through? Are we using that compost? Well, that's a thing. When you have a compost pile, you have to have somebody that turns that compost pile. You have to make sure your compost pile gets to a certain temperature so it can kill out weed seeds. It can kill out some of the different funguses that are growing in there. So, but if you are tending to your compost pile, use your compost in your orchard. Now, another thing is avoid the overuse of fungicides. And I get it. This can be a challenge, because anytime you use copper and sulfur fungicides, oh, excuse me, anytime you use copper and sulfur fungicides, they are going to kill out beneficial funguses too. So realize that when you're doing this, you're probably going to have to go back in and make sure you have a good fungal balance back in that orchard. Copper and sulfur are things that are used in the organic grower's toolbox. But like I say, they're somewhat non-selective, and they can kill out a lot of those beneficial soil fungi as well. And then, don't look at the mushrooms as being a problem in the orchard. Yes, there are some certain soil-borne funguses that can be a big problem growing anywhere. but 9 times out of 10, the little mushrooms that you're seeing growing in the orchard are not harmful to the plants you have living. So a little bit about some of the sources for these plant materials. So if you're looking for a lot of Missouri natives, so there are these suppliers here: Missouri Wildflower, City Roots Nursery, Green Thumb Gardens. These are just a handful. What I also suggest too is going to deeprootskc.org. And Deep Roots, um, they are an organization that promotes native plants throughout the Kansas City area. Deep Roots maintains a list of where there are native plant sales in Kansas City, and they have a list of recommended suppliers of native plants in the Kansas City area. Now, some of the other plants that I mentioned here, you could find some of these through strictly medicinal seeds, Richter's herbs, and companion plants. These are all companies that specialize in some of these medicinal or culinary herbs, or some of these companion plants, if you will, in order to make some of the fermented sprays that Michael Phillips talks about in his book. And then if you're looking for some of the more unusual edibles, Rain Tree Nursery and Burnt Ridge Nursery are great places to start. Another one that I forgot to put on here is One Green World. They're out of Portland, Oregon. Another place is here. If you want to add some things to your orchard, we do have bush cherries. We do have jujubes. We do have clove currants. We keep some elderberry on stock. We have persimmons. We are beyond sort of the quote unquote traditional fruit trees, but we have some of these others that are lower maintenance, that are still going to provide a human food source. And some of these are a more nutrient dense human food source. So reach out to us if you want, like I say, aronia berry, elderberry, persimmons, pawpaw, any of the plants that I mentioned in this presentation. And then here are just a few other resources. If you're interested in more than just this presentation, so Paul Stamets, he is kind of the godfather of mycelium promotion. He really loves mushrooms, and all mushrooms. He talks about utilizing mushrooms and biodefense capabilities, in oil spill remediation. The guy is a font of knowledge on mushrooms. Michael Phillips, who I referenced earlier, he has also written a book on mushrooms. And then there are the books about some of the native beneficial insects, also about growing forest gardens. And then there are our native plant societies, which if you really, that's more if you want to nerd out on native plants, but that's okay. So get involved, and then like I say, there's the deeprootskc.org, and like I say, that's a good resource if you're looking for native plant events that are going on in the Kansas City area. Well, with that, I'll entertain any questions. And feel free to unmute yourself.
if I can ask some of those things, if you're wanting to plant, are they fall items? I mean, as you tear out all the, vegetable sort of things and you're wanting to put in a few, you know, appropriate bug attracting, or are they all spring planting kind of things that
Yeah,
are?
so as far as trying to get like a an insectary garden established, you can plant a number of perennials still up into kind of mid to late October. So that that list that I had back a few slides there of all the things that we have in our insectary garden. Yeah, most of those you could get in the ground really kind of early September through late October. They'll overwinter just fine. And then they will come up next spring with a more robust root system, and you'll be on your way. They're, we sell a handful of those here. I think we're down to sort of bare bones right now. We have some of the Baptisia, the blue wild indigo, and I think that's really about it right now. Ah, can raised beds be used as compost piles? So I guess, what do you mean by that question? As in, like you have the raised bed, but you're not going to use it. So can you go ahead and start a compost on that raised bed? Yeah, you could. I would want to make sure you have something to contain the compost, though. So what that looks like is some sort of fencing, some sort of frame around that, and making sure that you stack it high enough, because my guess is you're probably also trying to outcompete some weediness in that raised bed. So the answer is yes, you can.